When the familiar world collapses, how do you find the strength not only to survive, but to rebuild your life from the ruins? On Christmas Eve, Flynn Crawford, a devoted father and resilient man, faces a devastating blow. His wife suddenly vanishes, leaving behind nothing but a brief note. But what if her departure is only the beginning of a darker, more dangerous chain of events? This is a story of love, betrayal, relentless fights for his children, and redemption that comes in the most unexpected ways. My dear friend, be sure to subscribe to my channel if this is your first time here, and give your royal like to this video. The soft twinkle of Christmas lights reflected off the pristine blanket of snow as Flynn Crawford carefully positioned the last ornament on the towering evergreen tree. His rugged, calloused hands, worn from years of working under the hoods of cars, handled the delicate glass decoration with surprising gentleness. At 38, moments like this still carried a sense of wonder, especially when he saw the unfiltered joy lighting up his daughters' faces. "Daddy, can I put the star on top?" Sandra, his 9-year-old, clutched the golden topper tightly, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Me too! I want to help too!" Sloane, her 6-year-old sister, chimed in, her curly hair bouncing with each excited jump. Flynn's heart warmed at their enthusiasm. "How about we do it together?" Flynn suggested with a grin, scooping up Sloane in one arm and Sandra in the other. Despite the strain, he held them both steady as they stretched upward toward the tree's crown. "Okay, ready?" Their small hands moved in concert, securing the star in its rightful place. Once done, Flynn gently lowered them back to the ground, watching their faces glow with pride. "This is the prettiest tree ever," Sloane declared, spinning in her festive red dress. Sandra, always the more measured of the two, nodded solemnly. "Definitely better than last year's," she affirmed. The sound of heels clicking on hardwood drew Flynn's attention. Abigail, his wife, entered the room with her phone in hand. At 34, she still turned heads with her flawless blonde hair and polished wardrobe, but her presence had become distant, her focus often elsewhere. "The tree looks good," she said without much conviction, her eyes glued to the screen. Her thumbs moved rapidly, tapping out a message. "The girls did a great job decorating," Flynn said, hoping to engage her. "Maybe you'd like to help them hang their stockings?" "In a bit," she replied distractedly. Another notification pinged, and a faint smile flickered across her face. A smile Flynn hadn't seen directed at him in far too long. Sandra tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, look! Daddy got me this angel ornament. It has my name on it." "That's nice, sweetheart," Abigail murmured, patting Sandra's head without looking up. "I just need to make a quick call about a listing. You can start dinner without me if I'm not back." Flynn's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even for the girl's sake. "It's Christmas Eve, Abigail. Can't this wait until tomorrow?" "Real estate doesn't stop for holidays, Flynn," she retorted, heading toward the study. Her voice dropped as she closed the door behind her. Sloane's lip quivered. "Is Mommy mad at us?" she asked softly. Flynn knelt and pulled his daughters into a comforting hug. "No, sweetie, she's just busy with work. How about we start making those famous Crawford Christmas cookies? Extra sprinkles, of course." The promise of cookies lifted their spirits. Soon the kitchen filled with the warm, comforting scent of vanilla and butter. Flynn guided the girls through the recipe, just as his own mother had taught him years ago. By the time the first batch was baking, Sandra was setting the table with their finest dishes, while Sloane carefully placed glitter-covered name cards she'd made at school. Flynn glanced at the clock. Abigail's quick call had stretched to over an hour. The doorbell rang, heralding the arrival of Flynn's parents. Eleanor and Frank Crawford entered, their arms laden with gifts and homemade casseroles. "There's my favorite girls!" Frank boomed, scooping his granddaughters into a bear hug. His graying beard tickled their cheeks, drawing giggles. Eleanor handed Flynn a dish, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "Where's Abigail?" she asked, her tone neutral but her meaning clear. "She's on a call," Flynn said, keeping his voice light. "She should join us soon." Eleanor's knowing look said more than words. She'd never fully embraced Abigail, though she'd remained civil for Flynn's sake. Dinner unfolded with forced cheer. Abigail joined them briefly, picking at her food while subtly scrolling through her phone. Flynn carried the conversation, filling the void she left. After his parents departed and the girls were tucked into bed, Flynn began tidying the kitchen. The house felt strangely hollow, the festive decorations unable to mask the growing emptiness. When he went to find Abigail, the study was dark and empty. That's when he saw it. A single sheet of paper tucked under the crystal angel centerpiece Eleanor had gifted them on their wedding day. His hands trembled as he unfolded the note. The message was devastatingly brief. "I found my happiness. Don't come after me." The paper crumpled in his fist as the reality sank in. Her car was gone from the garage. Upstairs, half of her closet was empty, her designer clothes and shoes missing. On the nightstand, her wedding ring glinted coldly in the moonlight. Flynn sank onto the edge of the bed, his bed now, and buried his face in his hands. The signs had been there, the constant texts, late nights, her emotional distance. He had clung to hope that they could mend the fractures. But tonight, her departure was painfully clear, orchestrated for maximum impact. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Sandra stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her small frame silhouetted in the dim light. "Daddy, I had a bad dream," she whispered. Her wide eyes scanned the room. "Where's Mommy?" Flynn opened his arms, and Sandra climbed into them, her body trembling. "Mommy had to leave for a while," he said, his voice raw but steady. "Did she leave because of me?" Sandra asked, her quiet words cutting through him. "No, sweetheart, never because of you," he assured her, holding her close. "This is grown-up stuff, but I want you to remember something. I will always be here for you and Sloane. Always. Promise?" "I promise," he said, kissing the top of her head. As she drifted to sleep in his arms, Flynn's mind raced. Tomorrow, he'd have to explain why their mother wasn't there for Christmas morning. He'd have to face his parents' concern, their inevitable anger. He'd have to navigate raising two little girls on his own. But tonight, he focused on holding his daughter, her tears soaking his shirt as his own slipped silently down his cheeks. Morning arrived with unforgiving brightness, sunlight glinting off the snow in a harsh, relentless glare. Flynn stayed up through the entire night, juggling phone calls and arranging details. As the first light of dawn crept into the sky, his mother arrived. Her face was marked with the redness of tears, yet she carried herself with quiet resolve. Together, they set about injecting some semblance of Christmas cheer into the house. Sloane, too young to fully grasp the gravity of the situation, accepted the simple story that Mommy had gone to work. Sandra, on the other hand, demanded answers Flynn wasn't ready to provide. "When will she be back?" Sandra's voice quivered. "Did she leave because I didn't clean my room? Does she still love us?" Each question cut into Flynn like a blade, but he held his composure, determined to give his daughters the best Christmas he could manage. They opened gifts, shared a festive breakfast, and spent the morning playing with new toys. If the girls noticed the faint shadow in Flynn's smile, they chose not to mention it. After the emotionally charged morning, they fell asleep for a nap, leaving Flynn alone at the kitchen table. He stared at the stack of papers in front of him, phone in hand. A few late-night internet searches had revealed unsettling truths about Abigail's client. Ashton Hammond was a fitness trainer with a reputation built more on Instagram posts than any credible business ventures. The whispers around town painted a damning picture. Abigail and Ashton had been seen together multiple times, a detail nobody had shared with Flynn. His finger hovered over the name of Renata Vega, a legal assistant recommended by a trusted friend. Divorce was a concept he never thought he'd face, but here he was, forced to confront it on Christmas Day. On the second ring, the line connected. "Mr. Crawford?" Renata's voice was calm yet professional. "I don't usually take calls during the holidays, but I understand this is urgent. Please, tell me everything." For the next hour, Flynn laid bare the story of his life. 15 years of marriage, 2 children, shared assets, and a wife who had walked out on Christmas Eve for a man whose primary claim to fame was his social media following. When he finished, Renata's voice took on a resolute edge. "We'll handle this," she assured him, You have my word. And don't worry, we'll ensure your daughter's well-being comes first. Her tone shifted to something more personal. People like your wife think they can abandon their responsibilities without consequence. They're mistaken. Flynn's voice was soft but firm. I'm not interested in revenge. I just want to protect my girls. Often those two goals align, Renata replied. The clacking of her keyboard punctuated the silence. We'll file the paperwork first thing tomorrow. In the meantime, document everything. Every text, every call, every interaction about your daughters. And Flynn, if she comes back, do not let her inside. People like her always return when it suits them. After the call ended, Flynn wandered the house. The tree still sparkled with lights. The stockings remained in their places, and the girls' newly opened gifts lay scattered across the floor. Yet the entire scene felt like a hollow echo of what it should have been. His thoughts were interrupted by a small voice. Daddy! Sloane stood at the bottom of the stairs, rubbing her eyes. Can we bake cookies? The kind Mommy likes? Flynn swallowed hard, forcing a smile. How about we make special cookies? Just for us. Sloane thought for a moment and nodded. With lots of chocolate chips? With all the chocolate chips, Flynn promised, lifting her into his arms. He kissed her forehead, taking in her sleepy, comforting scent. Maybe we can share some with Miss Martinez next door. Remember how she brought soup when you weren't feeling well? Sloane's face lit up. And Mr. Wilson at your work? Flynn chuckled. Absolutely, Princess. We'll make cookies for everyone who's been kind to us. What they needed now was kindness and connection, something to help them rebuild the life Abigail had left in ruins. As they mixed dough, Sandra joined in, drawn by the warm, familiar smells. Before long, laughter filled the kitchen as the girls adorned cookies with excessive sprinkles. Watching them, Flynn's heart both ached and healed. This wasn't the Christmas he had envisioned, but he resolved to make it meaningful, not for Abigail, not out of bitterness, but for his daughters who deserved nothing less. The next 2 years were a blur of school drop-offs, dance practices, and bedtime stories. Flynn poured his energy into both his auto repair shop and his daughters. He even learned to braid hair with the same meticulous care he used to fix engines. His business thrived, buoyed by his reputation for honesty and the unwavering support of his community. Customers brought casseroles along with their cars, neighbors offered playdates and sleepovers, and Miss Martinez became a grandmother figure, teaching the girls to garden and cook. Even his gruffest employee, Mr. Wilson, softened, stashing candy in his toolbox for the girls. Renata was a steady presence, guiding Flynn through the complexities of single parenthood. Her sharp mind and loyal demeanor became an anchor. One afternoon, as they watched the girls play at the park, Renata said, "You're doing more than okay, Flynn. Your girls are flourishing." Flynn smiled faintly, though his sigh betrayed lingering worries. Sandra still asks about her. It's hard. Renata's gaze hardened. That's natural. But remember, Abigail made her choice. The best thing you can do is keep showing them you're the parent who stayed. The divorce was finalized quietly. Abigail didn't fight it, nor did she attend the proceedings. Word spread that she and Ashton had moved to California in pursuit of influencer fame. Meanwhile, Flynn focused on creating new traditions, gardening with Miss Martinez, Sunday dinners at his parents' house, and volunteering at the local animal shelter. Slowly, the wounds Abigail left behind began to heal, leaving only faint scars. Then, on a frigid December night 2 years after her departure, Abigail returned. Flynn was helping the girls with their homework when the doorbell rang. He opened it to find a shadow of the woman he had once loved. Abigail stood there in worn jeans and a puffy coat, holding a sleeping baby. "Flynn," she said softly, her eyes flickering with the same calculating look he remembered. "We need to talk." Behind him, Sandra's voice broke the tense silence. "Mom?" Abigail's face lit up as she spotted her daughter. "Sandra, sweetheart, you've grown so much." Sandra hesitated, torn between joy and uncertainty, while Sloane clung to Flynn's leg, her young memory of Abigail almost non-existent. Flynn rested a protective hand on Sloane's shoulder and spoke evenly. "What do you want, Abigail?" Adjusting the baby in her arms, she revealed the infant's sleeping face. "This is Hunter," she said simply. And with those words, Flynn's world tilted once again. The child had just celebrated his first birthday, and since the law still listed Flynn as the boy's father, Abigail appeared seeking financial support. Her direct approach stunned Flynn. "What?" he asked, disbelief evident in his tone. "We're struggling, Flynn," she said, her frustration seeping through her words. Flynn's thoughts raced. "Ashton's business isn't going well?" he asked icily. Abigail's jaw tightened in defiance. "That's irrelevant. What matters is that your son needs help." She paused before adding sharply, "And we need to discuss custody of the girls. They've stayed with you long enough. It's time they return to their mother." A surge of anger threatened to break Flynn's composure, but he restrained himself, mindful of his daughters. "Sandra, take your sister upstairs," he said calmly. "But Dad," Sandra began to protest. "Now, Sandra," Flynn repeated firmly. Once the girls were out of earshot, Flynn stepped outside onto the porch, shutting the door behind him. His voice was low but firm. "You walked out, Abigail. You abandoned your family on Christmas Eve. You don't get to come back and dictate terms." Abigail's eyes brimmed with tears, but Flynn remained unmoved. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "I've changed." "The girls needed you," Flynn countered, his voice steely. "They needed you for their birthdays, their school performances, and every single night they cried for their mother. You were nowhere to be found." Abigail's desperation became palpable. "I'm here now. I want to make things right. They need their mom." "They needed you 2 years ago," Flynn replied coldly. "And as for the boy, we both know he isn't mine. You're not coming near our daughters." "You can't keep me away," she snapped. "I'm their mother." "Watch me," Flynn said, opening the door. "Leave. If you want to talk, go through my lawyer. Otherwise, stay out of our lives." Abigail's sorrow morphed into calculation. "This isn't over," she said coldly. "I always get what I want." Flynn shut the door with finality, his hands trembling with anger. Upstairs, he found Sandra and Sloane curled up on Sandra's bed. "Is Mom staying?" Sandra asked, her voice wavering between hope and fear. Flynn sat beside them, wrapping them both in a protective embrace. "No, sweetheart. Mom has her own life now. But listen to me. Nothing she says or does will ever change us. We're a family, and I will always protect you. Always." Flynn's heart ached as he held them close. Abigail's return wasn't about love or family. She had her own agenda, money, security, or something Ashton couldn't provide. She was trying to use the girls as leverage, but Flynn wouldn't allow it. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Flynn called his best friend, Wren. "You're not going to believe this," Flynn began, pacing the kitchen. "She wants child support for a baby that isn't mine, and she's demanding custody of the girls." Wren's outrage was immediate. "The audacity! That child isn't yours! She left months before he was born, didn't she?" "At least 6 months," Flynn confirmed. "We barely spoke by then." "Good," Wren said firmly. "We'll push for a paternity test if it comes to that. But you know she'll play dirty. She'll try to turn the girls against you and paint you as unfit." Flynn's grip tightened on the counter. "She's already started. I saw the way she looked at Sandra, like she was sizing her up." "Then we'll act fast," Wren said. "I'll get Callum on it first thing. He'll dig into what she's been doing these past 2 years. People like Abigail always leave a trail." Wren's keyboard clattered in the background. "Come to the office tomorrow. Bring everything you have. Texts, emails, witnesses. We're not letting her hurt those girls again." After the call, Flynn checked on his daughters. Sandra clung to her stuffed rabbit, tear stains visible on her cheeks. In the next room, Sloane slept peacefully, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding. Flynn whispered softly, "I promise, she won't hurt you again." The next morning, Sandra's subdued demeanor at breakfast contrasted sharply with her usual bubbly chatter. She toyed with her cereal before finally speaking. "Dad, why did Mom leave?" Flynn set his coffee down and met her gaze. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love, but it wasn't because of anything you or Sloane did. She said she's changed, Sandra murmured. Maybe she has. Flynn chose his words carefully. People can change, but that doesn't undo the pain they've caused. Your mom has to show she's thinking about what's best for you, not just what she wants. Like you stayed, Sloane said, milk dripping from her chin. You always stay. Flynn's throat tightened. That's right, Princess. I'll always stay. As the day unfolded, a gnawing sense of unease lingered. Flynn's fears were confirmed when he picked up Sandra from school. Her teacher, Mrs. Bennett, stopped him. Mr. Crawford, I thought you should know a woman approached Sandra during recess, speaking to her through the fence. When I intervened, she left quickly. Sandra said it was her mother. Flynn's stomach sank. Did she give Sandra anything? A phone, Mrs. Bennett said, handing him a small flip phone. I confiscated it. Sandra was upset, but I explained our rules. Thank you, Flynn said, pocketing the phone. Please alert the office that only I'm authorized to have contact with Sandra. The situation with her mother is complicated. Of course, Mrs. Bennett said kindly. Later that afternoon in Wren's office, Flynn handed over the phone. Wren quickly unlocked it and reviewed its contents. Messages were already queued. Daddy's keeping us apart. I miss you. Don't tell him about the phone. Flynn's anger simmered as Wren documented everything. She's trying to manipulate Sandra, Flynn said. But not this time. We're ready for her. Classic manipulation, Wren muttered, snapping photos of every incriminating message on the screen. She's working to drive a wedge between you and Sandra, casting you as the villain in her story. She's just a kid, Flynn bit out, his frustration bleeding into his words. Dragging Sandra into this? That's hitting below the belt? That's exactly why she's doing it, Wren replied matter-of-factly, setting the phone aside. Callum's already digging into her past. He's unearthing some intriguing details from her time in California. Give him a few more days to put everything together. Flynn's jaw tightened as he nodded, his restraint visibly taut. In the meantime, Wren continued, her unwavering gaze meeting his, be the parent they can count on. Pour your energy into loving those girls. Record everything Abigail does, but don't let her provoke you into showing anger. That's exactly what she's fishing for, Flynn admitted bitterly, knowing Wren was right. As he drove home, his mind whirled with unresolved thoughts. At dinner, Sandra was unusually subdued, though Sloane's bubbly recounting of her day filled the silence with a fragile sense of normalcy. After tucking the girls into bed with stories and kisses, Flynn retreated to his office. Old family photos stared back at him from the walls, each one a reminder of happier but misleading times. Sandra's first birthday, Abigail in the background, half absorbed in her phone, Sloane's baptism, Abigail arriving late and leaving early, citing some pressing client meeting, Christmas mornings, school recitals, vacations, moments where Abigail's body was present but her heart and mind were elsewhere. The signs had been there all along, but Flynn had been too focused on keeping the family intact, too determined to create the life his daughters deserved to see the cracks forming beneath him. His phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present. An unknown number. He didn't need to guess who it was. The girls need their mother. Stop making this harder than it has to be. Flynn stared at the message for a moment before blocking the number and putting the phone aside. He had learned long ago that responding in anger only fed the fire. Revenge was never worth the cost. Instead, he focused on what mattered, raising his daughters with unwavering love and showing them what strength truly looked like. Tomorrow he'd meet with Callum, review the findings, and prepare for whatever Abigail had planned next. But tonight, his priority was being present for his girls. Surrounded by the home he was slowly rebuilding from the wreckage Abigail had left behind, Flynn made a silent vow. He wouldn't just survive her games, he would put an end to them. The next evening, the loud thud of a backpack hitting the floor pulled Flynn's attention from his paperwork. Sandra stood in the doorway, arms folded, her expression far too serious for a 10-year-old. Mom says you're lying to us. Flynn set his pen down, giving her his full attention. What exactly did she say? She told me you made her leave, Sandra replied, her voice shaky. She said you were mean to her and that you won't let her see us. When did she tell you this? Flynn asked calmly, though his heart tightened. After school at the park, Sandra said, tilting her chin up defensively. She even bought me ice cream. Flynn took a measured breath, keeping his tone steady. Sandra, we've talked about not speaking to strangers at the park. She's not a stranger, she's my mom! Sandra's voice broke, her eyes brimming with tears. She said you'd say that. She said you're just jealous. Come here, sweetheart, Flynn said, motioning to the chair across from him. Once Sandra sat, he leaned forward. Do you remember Christmas Eve 2 years ago? When Mom left? Yeah, Sandra murmured, avoiding his gaze. Did I make her leave? No, Sandra said softly. Have I ever told her she can't see you or Sloane? No. Then there's nothing more to it, Flynn said, his voice firm yet kind. Your mom made her choices. She left a note and walked away. She didn't call for your birthdays or show up for your plays. Those were her decisions, not mine. She says she's sorry, Sandra whispered, fidgeting with her sleeve. She says she made a mistake. Sometimes, sorry isn't enough, Flynn said gently, taking her hand. Sandra, look at me. Who's been here every day? Who makes your lunch, helps with your homework, and takes care of you when you're sick? You do, Sandra whispered. Before more could be said, the front door slammed shut. Sloane's voice rang out from the hallway. Dad, Miss Martinez said Mom tried to pick me up from her house. Flynn stood immediately, Sandra following close behind as he rushed to the kitchen. Sloane stood there with their elderly neighbor, Miss Martinez, whose usually warm demeanor was overshadowed by indignation. That woman, Miss Martinez said sharply. She claimed you gave her permission to take Sloane for ice cream. I told her to leave before I called the police. She showed me pictures of her baby, Sloane chimed in. She said he's my brother and wants to meet me. Thank you, Elena, Flynn said, placing a calming hand on Miss Martinez's arm. Girls, head to your room and start on your homework. Once the girls were gone, Miss Martinez gripped Flynn's arm tightly. That woman's not right in the head, she said. She's charming on the surface, but there's something dangerous beneath it. She's building a case against you. Flynn nodded grimly. I'll handle it. He pulled out his phone and left urgent messages for both Rin and Callum. Within the hour, he was in Rin's office with Callum laying out papers across the table. Your ex-wife's been keeping busy, Callum said, sliding a stack of documents toward Flynn. 3 real estate scams in California. Same tricks, different victims. She prowled through properties she had no rights to, duping unsuspecting buyers into handing over deposits, only to disappear when it was time to finalize the transactions. Wren picked up a photo, instantly recognizing her boyfriend Ashton, flaunting an opulent lifestyle funded by ill-gotten money. Designer clothes, a gleaming sports car, all financed by the earnings of innocent victims. How much had they stolen? Flynn scanned the documents in front of him. Nearly $500,000, he murmured. Callum's weathered face tightened as he absorbed the figure. They've got warrants in 2 counties. That's why they're back here. They're hiding. And now she wants custody of the girls? Wren's laugh was sharp and bitter. Not in this lifetime. Flynn studied a surveillance image of Abigail and Ashton. The pair were dressed to impress, their polished exteriors betraying the strain beneath, like performers struggling to maintain an expensive illusion. She's been trying to turn the girls against me. Classic manipulation tactics. Callum nodded grimly. She's desperate for a safe harbor. Your stability makes you the perfect target. She won't get near my daughters, Flynn declared, his voice firm as iron. Wren leaned closer. What's the plan? We document everything, Flynn said resolutely. Every breach of the custody agreement, every attempt to manipulate the situation. I'll dig into the fraud case, Callum added. When she files for custody, and she will, we'll counter with all the evidence. He retrieved his phone and played an audio recording. Ashton's voice filled the room. I'm done with her nonsense. That kid, not mine. She was hooking up with someone in LA while we were together. She's toxic. Everything she touches turns to crap. Flynn didn't flinch. How'd you get that? Cornered him at the gym, Callum replied with a sly grin. People spill a lot when they're tired of running. He'll testify if we need him. For the next hour, they meticulously outlined their strategy. By the time Flynn left, the shadows outside had grown long. His phone buzzed with a message from Sandra. Mom's here. She's crying on the porch. What should I do? Flynn raced home, ignoring speed limits. On the front steps, Abigail sat with her makeup artfully smudged, while Sandra peeked nervously from a window. Get off my property, Flynn said, his voice low but unwavering. Abigail swayed, refusing to budge. They're my daughters too. You can't keep them from me. Watch me, he replied, brushing past her to reach the door. Her tone turned venomous. I'll tell them everything, how you controlled me, isolated me, pushed me away. Flynn stopped and faced her, his gaze like stone. No, you won't. Because if you come near them again, I'll tell the authorities everything you've done. The fraud, the scams, the theft. Her complexion paled. You're bluffing. Try me, Flynn said evenly. I've documented every crime and every lie. Push me, and you'll face the consequences. Her bravado cracked. The girls deserve better than this. They deserve better than you, he replied coldly. Leave now, or the next knock on your door will be from the police. Her composure dissolved as she retreated. This isn't over. It is for now, he said, locking the door behind him. Sandra was waiting in the hallway, pale and worried. Dad, what's happening? He opened his arms and she rushed into them. Listen to me carefully, he said gently. Your mom isn't well. She's made choices that hurt people, and now she's trying to use you and your sister to avoid the fallout. Sandra's eyes widened. What kind of things? Things that caused a lot of harm, he said softly, stroking her hair. I know you want to believe she's changed, but she's dangerous right now. Promise me you'll keep your distance. She nodded against his chest. I promise. Later that night, once the girls were asleep, Flynn sat alone in the dim living room, keeping an eye on the security feeds Callum had helped install. Cameras covered every approach to the house, and alerts were synced to his phone. A message from Wren lit up the screen. Emergency hearing scheduled for tomorrow. Judge Matthews, she's tough on parental manipulation. Be ready. Another text came through, this one from Callum. Ashton's agreed to testify. Full statement recorded. Abigail doesn't know yet. Flynn's lips curled into a grim smile. The pieces were falling into place. Abigail could try her tricks, but he wasn't the man she had betrayed years ago. He had grown stronger, and now his focus was on protecting his daughters. That made him a force she couldn't counter. The next morning, a new complication arose. Abigail posted a tearful video online, accusing Flynn of alienating her from the children. The production was impeccable, complete with somber music and carefully crafted appeals for sympathy. She's skilled, Wren admitted as they watched the video in her office. But we're better. They arrived at the courthouse early. Flynn dressed with care, presenting himself as a composed, responsible father. His daughters were safely at school, shielded by new security measures and updated restraining orders. Judge Matthews, a no-nonsense woman with piercing gray eyes, reviewed the evidence in silence. Abigail's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, fidgeted uncomfortably as more evidence was presented. Your Honor, he began, my client only wishes to reconnect with her children. Judge Matthews cut him off. Mr. Crawford has provided substantial evidence to support his claims, including active warrants for your client in California. Were you aware of those? The attorney stammered, his confidence eroding. Abigail's face turned ghostly pale. The judge's gaze hardened. This court takes a firm stance against parents who use their children as pawns. I've also reviewed evidence of repeated violations of custody agreements, including unauthorized contact with the children. Abigail's voice quavered as she tried to sound remorseful. I just want to see my babies. I've changed. Abigail faced Flynn, her voice trembling with forced sincerity. I've made some bad choices, she confessed. Flynn's response was sharp, cutting through her words like a razor. Bad choices. You abandoned our daughters on Christmas Eve and disappeared for 2 years without any explanation." He leaned forward, his eyes blazing. "And now you're back, dodging fraud charges and trying to manipulate your way back into their lives. They're not pawns in your schemes. They're children, innocent and fragile, and I'll do everything to protect them from you." For a brief moment, Abigail's mask of maternal concern slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Judge Matthews noticed it instantly. "The request for emergency custody modification is denied," the judge declared, the gavel's echo sealing the decision. "Furthermore, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order. Miss Hammond, you are prohibited from contacting the minor children until a full hearing is held. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." Outside the courtroom, Flynn felt Rin's steady grip on his arm. "This is just the beginning," she warned. His eyes followed Abigail as she stormed out, her lawyer trailing behind. "I know," he said quietly. "She's not done yet." Flynn's instincts proved correct. That afternoon, as he assisted a customer in his shop, his phone erupted with notifications. Abigail had shown up at Sandra's school, this time accompanied by a photographer. She made a dramatic scene, sobbing as security escorted her away, while Sandra stood nearby, bewildered and upset. The photos quickly circulated online. "She's spinning the narrative," Rin said over the phone when Flynn called her. "She's making it look like you're the villain. What's the plan?" Flynn's voice was calm but firm. "We stick to the truth." He explained his next move. "I'm releasing the evidence of her fraud to the press. Let's see how people react when they learn what she's really done." By evening, the story had broken. Callum's detailed investigation painted a damning picture: forged bank records, victim testimonies, and videos of Abigail and Ashton indulging in luxury funded by stolen money. The headlines were blunt: "Mother fighting for custody wanted for real estate fraud." Flynn's phone buzzed with a call from Ashton. "She's unraveling," Ashton admitted, fear evident in his voice. "She knows I cooperated with your investigator. She's desperate now and armed." Flynn's heart sank. "Where is she?" he demanded. Ashton's response was grim. "I don't know, but she took off with the baby after Henderson, one of her California victims, threatened to expose her. That's when she bought a gun." After hanging up, Flynn immediately looped Rin and Callum into a call. "She's armed and desperate," he informed them. "We need to alert the police." Rin's voice was tight. "Are the girls safe?" Flynn reassured her. "They're home with Miss Martinez. I have security cameras in place." As he spoke, his app sent an alert. A shadowy figure in black was approaching his back door. "She's here," Flynn said, already heading for his car. "Call the police." Chaos erupted as Flynn raced home, his mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. This time, however, he was prepared. Abigail's past actions had taught him to fortify his home and implement safety measures. Security footage revealed Abigail, dressed in black, attempting to pick the lock. Miss Martinez confronted her with nothing but a rolling pin, shielding the girls who were hidden upstairs. Sirens wailed in the distance as Flynn arrived. He found Abigail mid-act. "Stop," he said firmly, his voice calm but commanding. "Don't do something you'll regret." Her hands shook as she held the gun, her voice trembling with anger. "You ruined everything. I had a plan. The girls would beg to live with me. You'd have to pay. You'd have to watch them choose me." "They're not pieces in your game," Flynn said evenly. "They're our daughters." Her voice rose to a desperate scream. "I need them. Don't you get it? Their testimony is my only shot at avoiding prison. If I'm a loving mother reunited with her kids, no jury would convict me." Her grip faltered as police officers silently moved into position. Flynn softened his tone. "It's over. Put it down." For a moment, she hesitated, her eyes flashing with calculation. Then a twisted smile spread across her face. "You win," she murmured. Before she could act, officers tackled her, sending the gun skidding across the lawn. As she was dragged away in handcuffs, she shouted, "Tell them I love them! I did it all for them!" From their bedroom window, Sandra and Sloane turned away, unwilling to watch anymore. That night, after the chaos subsided, Flynn sat at the kitchen table with Rin and Callum. She's facing a long list of charges, Callum said, listing them off. Fraud, attempted assault, violating custody orders, illegal firearm possession. Rin's voice was soft. How are the girls? Flynn glanced toward the stairs. Stronger than she'll ever understand, he said quietly. Rin offered a small smile. Like their father. She grew serious. The media will be looking for statements. This is a big story. Flynn stood and stretched. Let them write what they want. My focus is on my daughters. Upstairs, he found Sandra and Sloane curled up together in Sandra's bed, as they had during thunderstorms. Sandra stirred as he sat beside them. Is Mom going to jail? She asked softly. Flynn nodded. Yes, sweetheart. For a long time. Sandra's voice was firm. Good. She didn't want us. She just wanted to use us. Flynn took a deep breath and chose his words carefully. Your mom lost sight of what really matters, he said gently. She made a decision, one that placed her own desires above all else, above loyalty, above morality, above the bonds of love and family. Yet you still remembered, Sloane murmured sleepily. No, my princess, I never forgot. Flynn leaned down and pressed a kiss to each of his daughters' foreheads. Get some rest now. Tomorrow is a new beginning. As their breathing deepened into the steady cadence of sleep, his thoughts drifted to the challenges awaiting them. The path to recovery was rarely simple, and some wounds might never fully heal, but they would confront it all together, as they always had. A faint vibration from his phone shattered the stillness. A message from Rin. The DA denied the bail request. She's staying in custody. Another notification followed, this time from Callum. Found the baby's biological father, wealthy guy in Los Angeles. He's been looking for his son ever since Abigail vanished with him months ago. Flynn sent back concise replies before silencing his phone. Tomorrow, the chaos, the legal battles, the media onslaught, the fallout, would demand his attention. Tonight, his focus was on his daughters. As the first rays of dawn painted the neighborhood in shades of gold and rose, Flynn prepared their go-to comfort breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes. Sandra joined him in the kitchen, carefully measuring ingredients with meticulous precision, while Sloane busied herself setting the table with their everyday dishes. Dad, Sandra began, scattering chocolate chips evenly over the batter. Is it wrong that I don't feel anything for her? Not at all, Flynn replied as he expertly flipped a pancake. Your feelings are your own. No one can dictate them. Sandra's gaze turned reflective. I think I miss the person I thought she was, the one who used to sing to us. Was that version of her real? Parts of her were, Flynn admitted, sliding a pancake onto a plate. People are complicated. They can embody both good and bad qualities. What matters most are the choices they make. Like her choice to leave, Sloane chimed in, her mouth full of pancake. Exactly, Flynn said, looking at them both intently. And like my choice to stay, our decisions define us. They reveal who we truly are. Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Through the window, Flynn caught sight of a throng of reporters gathered outside, eager for a headline, a scandalous tale of deceit, desperation, and a late-night confrontation. But they were oblivious to the tender moments of healing within these walls. They hadn't witnessed the strength forged in pain or the love that grew in resilience. Ready to face the day? Flynn asked his daughters. Sandra straightened her back, her quiet resolve mirroring his own. Always together, she said firmly. This was the essence of family, not the flawless image Abigail had worked so hard to construct, but the messy, genuine truth they had rebuilt from the ruins of her betrayal. Stronger, wiser, and unyielding, they stepped out to meet the world. Flynn had no doubt they wouldn't just survive, they would thrive, not despite Abigail's actions, but because they had risen above them together. The courthouse loomed against a harsh December sky, its stone facade as cold as the biting wind. Adjusting his tie, Flynn caught a glimpse of himself in the car's window. 2 years of relentless battles had left their mark, gray threading through his hair, exhaustion etched into his face. They're ready for us, Rin said as she joined him, her overstuffed briefcase brimming with evidence. Inside lay photographs, financial records, and witness testimonies, the painstaking results of 2 years of preparation. "How many victims are testifying today?" Flynn asked, holding the courthouse door open. Rin checked her phone. "Along with Ashton, Callum, and the detective from LA who located Hunter's biological father." She hesitated at the security checkpoint. "She'll likely pull some dramatic move." "Let her try," Flynn said, stepping through the metal detector. "Her manipulations won't work anymore." The courtroom buzzed with subdued chatter. The back rows were crowded with reporters, drawn to the spectacle of betrayal, fraud, and violence. But none of them knew the depth of the story. They hadn't lived it. Callum met them outside the courtroom. "Heads up, she's requested to speak with you before we start." "Absolutely not," Flynn said firmly. "That's what I told her attorney," Callum replied, flipping through his notes. "Also, she's been sending Sandra letters from jail. The school intercepted 3 last week." Flynn's expression hardened. "Are those part of our evidence?" "Already included," Rin said, tapping her briefcase. "They establish a clear pattern of trying to manipulate minors." Inside the courtroom, Abigail sat at the defense table, her appearance carefully polished despite the prison uniform. Her court-appointed lawyer shuffled papers nervously, already looking defeated. "Let the evidence speak for itself," Rin whispered as they took their seats. "Don't rise to her bait." "I know her games," Flynn said with quiet determination. "She doesn't control us anymore." Detective Morris joined them, handing Rin a folder. "Here are the bank statements you requested," he said. "They show she'd been planning this for months, setting up accounts, moving funds around." "That bolsters the case for premeditation," Rin noted. "What about Hunter's father, Mark Henderson?" "Solid guy, tech executive. He didn't know she was married when they dated. She told him she was a wealthy widow," Morris explained. "He has full custody now and hired a child psychologist to help Hunter adjust." Judge Reynolds entered the room, his reputation for efficiency preceding him. The bailiff called for order as Abigail sat straighter, her face a carefully crafted mask of remorse. "Let's begin," the judge said, settling into his chair. "Miss Stanley, your opening statement?" The prosecutor rose, radiating confidence. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Abigail Hammond, also known as Abigail Crawford, orchestrated a calculated series of crimes spanning multiple states. From abandoning her family on Christmas Eve, to defrauding homebuyers and culminating in an armed confrontation at her ex-husband's residence, Miss Hammond's actions have demonstrated a consistent disregard for the law and basic human decency." Abigail's lawyer stood next, steeling himself to respond. The defense's argument barely held any weight, even to those inclined to sympathize. "Your Honor, while my client's choices were flawed, they stemmed from her deep maternal instincts," the defense attorney pleaded. "Objection," Miss Stanley interjected, her tone sharp and cutting through the courtroom. "Counsel is arguing, not presenting facts." "Sustained," Judge Reynolds responded, his face stern. "Counselor, stick strictly to the evidence." The prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision. Witness after witness, victims of Abigail's elaborate cons, recounted their stories. Elderly couples and young families alike had been drawn in by her charm and the irresistible promises of finding their perfect homes. Mrs. Henderson, a retired schoolteacher, was the first to testify. Her hands quivered as she gestured toward Abigail, her voice thick with emotion. "She visited our senior community," Mrs. Henderson explained. "She claimed to specialize in helping retirees find their dream homes. She remembered personal details about us, even asking about our grandchildren. We thought she was genuine." "How much money did you give her?" asked the prosecutor. "Our entire retirement savings," she replied, her voice breaking. $200,000. She even hugged me and said she'd treat us like family." The Ramirez family followed, recounting their experience as young parents trying to buy their first home. Mr. Ramirez spoke with a heavy accent, his voice thick with frustration. "She showed us pictures, let us walk through the house, told us the owners were eager to sell because they were abroad," he said, pausing to collect himself. "We used every bit of our savings and maxed out our credit cards for the deposit." "And what happened when you tried to move in?" the prosecutor asked. The real owners contacted the police. They'd never heard of her and the house was never for sale, Mr. Ramirez answered, anger clear in his tone. Our children had already picked out their rooms. Victim after victim shared similar stories, recounting how Abigail had won their trust, stolen their money, and disappeared. Some were left with nothing but crushing debt, others lost their life savings, and all carried the pain of betrayal. During a recess, Flynn stepped outside for a breath of air. Nearby, Wren was reviewing her notes, her expression focused. "You okay?" she asked, noticing his troubled face. "Just thinking about Sandra and Sloane," Flynn admitted, leaning against the wall. "She did the same to those people as she did to our girls. She twisted their trust and used it against them. That's why I'm here." Wren placed a supportive hand on his arm. "We're here to make sure she doesn't hurt anyone else." Back in the courtroom, Detective Morris presented an extensive account of Abigail's fraudulent schemes. Miss Hammond operated under multiple aliases, he explained, gesturing toward a display of documents. Each persona was carefully constructed to exploit specific vulnerabilities in her victims. "Tell us about her connection to Hunter," Miss Stanley prompted. Detective Morris detailed Abigail's involvement with Mark Henderson, a wealthy tech executive. She claimed to be a wealthy widow. After their son Hunter was born, she convinced Mark to include her name on accounts intended for their child's future. She then emptied the accounts and disappeared with the baby. "Objection," Abigail's lawyer interjected. "This testimony is prejudicial." "Overruled," the judge replied. "It's relevant to establish a pattern of behavior." Abigail's accomplice, Ashton Hammond, was the next witness. He avoided looking at her as Miss Stanley began questioning him. "Can you explain the operation?" she asked. "It was her idea," Ashton admitted, shifting uneasily. "She'd find homes that seemed empty or newly listed, take pictures and forge documents. She said it was an easy way to make money." He paused. "When things got risky, we'd pack up and leave town." "What about Hunter?" "He's not mine," Ashton said, his voice low. "She'd been involved with some wealthy guy in Los Angeles. She wanted child support, but when he started digging into her past, she ran off with the baby." Abigail's furious outburst cut through the courtroom. "Liar!" she screamed, prompting Judge Reynolds to issue a stern warning. Miss Stanley continued undeterred. "What were her plans for her other children?" "She thought no jury would convict a mother fighting for her kids," Ashton confessed, staring at the floor. "She didn't care who she hurt. She wanted to use them as a shield." "And the gun?" Ashton's face turned pale. "She bought it in California after one of her victims threatened to expose her. She said it was for protection, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" "She said if she couldn't have her perfect life, Flynn wouldn't have his either." The defense's cross-examination struggled to challenge Ashton's damaging testimony. Financial expert Callum presented a detailed analysis of Abigail's spending, linking it directly to her victims' funds. "Miss Hammond and Mr. Hammond lived lavishly," he explained, displaying statements showing extravagant purchases, designer clothing, gourmet dining, and luxury cars. "And what did she do after abandoning her family?" Miss Stanley asked. Callum displayed surveillance images showing Abigail frequenting high-end establishments. While her victims faced financial ruin, she dined at upscale restaurants, shopped at luxury boutiques, and drove expensive cars. Meanwhile, her daughters spent birthdays and holidays without her. During another recess, Flynn called home to check on his daughters. His mother's voice was steady. "Sandra's helping Sloane with her science project," Eleanor reassured him. "How's it going there?" "As expected," he replied. "Good," she said firmly. "Make sure she pays for what she's done to my granddaughters." When Flynn returned to the stand, he shared the pain Abigail had left in her wake. "It was Christmas Eve," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "She left a note. No goodbye, no explanation for our daughters, she just disappeared. And when she came back, she tried to manipulate our girls, turn them against me. When that failed, she resorted to stalking, attempted kidnapping, and finally showed up at our home with a gun. How have your daughters been affected?" Flynn's jaw tightened as he answered. Sandra blamed herself, thinking she had done something wrong. Sloane was too young to understand, but old enough to feel the loss. They both have nightmares. They struggle to trust anyone. We're still trying to pick up the pieces. Reflect on the evening Miss Hammond arrived at your residence with a firearm. What was her state of mind? She was frantic and enraged, adamant that the girls testify in her favor. She demanded that they present her in a sympathetic light to the jury. When I declined, she directed the weapon toward their bedroom window. Had you known she was armed before that night? No, but we had taken precautions beforehand. We installed security cameras, replaced locks, and enhanced safety protocols at the school. Her actions had been growing more unpredictable. Abigail's lawyer tried to depict me as domineering, suggesting my behavior had driven her away. However, that argument fell apart in the face of years of community testimony. Neighbors, teachers, and friends attested to my commitment to my daughters. Miss Martinez, usually known for her warmth, delivered her testimony with unwavering determination. "I've lived next door to the Crawfords for 10 years, she declared. "I watched those girls grow up. After their mother left, Flynn became both a father and a mother to them. He never complained. He just loved those girls and worked tirelessly to provide for them." "Were you present the night Miss Hammond came to the house with a weapon?" "Yes," Miss Martinez answered, her voice steely with conviction. "I was watching the girls. She tried to break in through the back door, shouting that she was taking them away. When I confronted her, she brandished the gun." "What happened after that?" "I stood my ground," she continued. "Those girls are like my own. I've been part of their lives for years." Flynn arrived just as she was threatening to shoot. He remained calm, trying to defuse the situation while protecting his children, as always. The school principal, teachers, and even Mr. Wilson from the auto repair shop spoke to my character and Abigail's spiraling behavior. "She'd appear uninvited at school events," Sandra's teacher recounted. "She even tried to remove Sandra from class. When we stopped her, she'd cause a scene, upsetting the children. Eventually, we had to bolster security measures. When Abigail herself took the stand, she presented a calculated image. Her voice was soft, her gaze downcast, and her demeanor contrite. "I made mistakes," she began, dabbing at what seemed to be deliberately timed tears. "I was stuck in an unhappy marriage, searching for something better. Everything I did was for my children." "Including abandoning them on Christmas Eve?" Miss Stanley's question sliced through Abigail's narrative. "I wasn't thinking clearly," Abigail stammered. "Were you thinking clearly when you showed up at their home with a loaded firearm?" "I was desperate," she cried, her voice breaking. "Flynn turned them against me." The prosecutor interjected. "Miss Hammond, bank records indicate you spent stolen funds on designer handbags while your daughters celebrated birthdays without you. How does that align with maternal love?" Abigail's composed facade cracked. "You don't understand," she snapped. "I deserved better. I deserved the life I wanted." "At the expense of others?" the prosecutor pressed. "Including your own children?" "They were fine," Abigail yelled. "Flynn had them. He's always the perfect father, making me look bad. Do you know how it feels to watch him play hero while I had nothing?" Flynn couldn't stay silent. "You had daughters who loved you," he said, "and you threw it away for luxury and empty dreams." "Order!" Judge Reynolds commanded, his gavel striking sharply. "Mr. Crawford, do not address the defendant directly." The damage was done. Abigail's carefully constructed image had been dismantled, exposing her manipulative tendencies. The jury saw it. The judge saw it. Even her attorney appeared resigned. The closing arguments were succinct. The prosecution painted her as a woman who chose greed over family, deceit over integrity, and manipulation over love. The defense could only plead for leniency, citing her emotional struggles. The jury deliberated for under 2 hours. On the charges of grand theft, fraud, attempted assault with a deadly weapon, and child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. Abigail's outraged cry echoed in the courtroom. As officers restrained her, she glared at Flynn. "This isn't over. Tell my girls I love them. Tell them enough." Judge Reynolds intervened. "Miss Hammond, your actions have demonstrated a pattern of harmful and manipulative behavior. I sentence you to 15 years in state prison with no eligibility for parole for 10 years. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, eager for comments. Rin stepped forward to manage the press, allowing Flynn to slip away and call home. "Dad?" Sandra answered quickly. "Is it over?" "It's over, sweetheart," Flynn assured her. "Mom's going away for a long time." A pause, then, "Good. Can we have pizza for dinner? Miss Martinez taught us how to make dough from scratch." Flynn chuckled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Anything you want?" "Can you put Grandma on the phone?" Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. "You did it, son." "We did it," Flynn replied. "All of us." Flynn looked around at his team. Rin was managing the reporters, Callum was organizing case files, and Detective Morris was shaking hands with victims' families. Later that evening, everyone gathered at Flynn's home for a celebration dinner. Homemade pizzas and Miss Martinez's tamales covered the table as they reveled in their hard-won victory and survival. "To new beginnings," Flynn's father toasted, "and to my son, the strongest man I know." "To family," Miss Martinez added, "the ones we choose and the ones who choose us." Detective Morris shared an update about Hunter. "He's doing well with his father. Mark mentioned he's open to the idea of Hunter meeting his sisters when they're older, if they're interested." Eleanor beamed at the girls. "Sandra, show your dad what you and Sloane made today." Sandra returned with a wrapped package. Inside was a photo album, its pages empty but decorated with their drawings and hopeful messages. "For our new memories," Sandra explained. "The good ones." "Daddy," Sloane tugged on Flynn's sleeve, "can we still have Christmas here, even though Mom ruined it before?" Flynn hugged her tightly. "She didn't ruin anything, sweetheart. Christmas is about family. The real family who loves us no matter what. Look around you." Sandra settled onto the couch beside Flynn, her eyes bright with hope. "This is our family now. Do you think we could start some new traditions? Maybe Miss Martinez could teach us how to make tamales for Christmas Eve." Miss Martinez's face lit up. "We'll begin tomorrow, and your father will have to join us, of course." "I'll volunteer as the official taste tester," Callum quipped, raising his hand with a mischievous grin. Laughter rippled through the room, mingling with the rhythmic ticking of Detective Morris's watch as he checked the time. "I should get moving," Morris said, standing up. "I've got an early flight tomorrow. But before I go," he handed Flynn a business card. "Mark Henderson asked me to give you this. He'd like to explore setting up some kind of connection for the kids when they're older. Only if it's something you and the girls want, of course." Flynn examined the card thoughtfully. "Let him know we'll consider it. That's a choice the girls should make when the time feels right." After Morris departed, the evening settled into a cozy rhythm. Miss Martinez and Eleanor swapped recipes while Frank regaled the girls with wildly exaggerated fishing stories. Meanwhile, Callum and Wren sat with Flynn, discussing the future. "The victims have started filing civil suits," Wren explained. "Any recovered assets will go directly toward restitution." "That's a step in the right direction," Flynn replied, his gaze drifting to Sandra, who was teaching Sloane how to play chess with the set he'd bought after Abigail's departure. "What about the letter Abigail sent Sandra?" Flynn asked. "It's been destroyed," Callum assured him, taking a sip of coffee. "Except for the evidence copies. The school's been instructed to forward anything from her directly to the authorities." Wren's tone turned serious. "She'll try again. Maybe not soon, but eventually. People like her don't just stop." Flynn's voice was calm but firm. "Let her try. We're stronger now. All of us." As the evening wore on and the guests trickled out, Flynn found himself in the kitchen with Wren, loading plates into the dishwasher. "You know," she said, handing him a plate, "when you first came into my office 2 years ago, I never imagined we'd end up here." "Hosting a dishwashing party?" he teased. She chuckled. "Building a family. These girls are amazing and you've done an incredible job with them." "I've had help," Flynn replied, closing the dishwasher. "And I still do." Their eyes met, holding for a moment before Wren turned away, drying her hands. "Speaking of help, Miss Martinez mentioned the girls want to repaint their rooms. Sandra's thinking purple, and Sloane's set on rainbows." Flynn smiled. I promised them we'd tackle it over winter break. Care to join the painting crew? I wouldn't miss it, Wren said, gathering her things. See you at the dance recital Saturday. Front row, as always. After she left, Flynn wandered through the house, taking in the memories etched into every corner. The walls carried traces of the past, family photos he hadn't yet removed, marks on the doorframe charting the girl's growth, and tiny handprints preserved in clay. But now, those same walls told a story of resilience. Sloane's science fair ribbons, Sandra's colorful art projects, and new memories layering over old scars. Upstairs, he found the girls whispering in Sandra's room, long past their bedtime. "Hey, you two should be asleep," he said, stepping inside. Sandra sat up, her expression serious. "Dad, we've been talking about Hunter." Flynn perched on the edge of the bed. "What about him?" "He's our brother, isn't he? Even though Mom lied about him." Flynn nodded. "Even though she lied." Sandra's voice softened. "Maybe someday we could meet him." Flynn felt a swell of pride at her compassion. "If that's what you want, we can talk to his father, but only when you're both ready." Sandra thought for a moment before deciding. "Not yet, but one day he should know he has sisters who care about him." "Yeah," Sloane murmured, stifling a yawn. "Sisters are important." "The most important," Flynn agreed, tucking them in. "Now get some sleep. We've got tamale lessons tomorrow." Later, in his room, Flynn opened the photo album the girls had made for him. The first page held their handprints, Sandra's precise, Sloane's slightly smudged. Below, Sandra had written in careful lettering, "To Dad, thank you for staying. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for showing us what real love looks like. We're the luckiest daughters ever." Sloane had added doodled hearts and scrawled, "You're our hero." He traced the words with his fingers, feeling the texture of the paper beneath his touch. Abigail had tried to tear them apart, but instead, she'd only strengthened their bond. The challenges they'd faced had transformed their family into something unshakable. Tomorrow would mark a new beginning, filled with traditions like tamale making, ornaments celebrating their journey, and the warmth of a house full of love. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. Sandra stood in the doorway, her oversized pajamas making her look smaller than usual. "Another bad dream?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I just wanted to say something. Remember when Mom came back and said you were keeping us from her?" "I remember." Her voice was steady. "You weren't keeping us from her. You were protecting us until we were strong enough to protect ourselves. That's what real love does, right?" Flynn pulled her into a hug, his heart full. "That's exactly what real love does." As Sandra drifted off beside him, Flynn reflected on the power of second chances. Not for Abigail. Her choices were hers alone, but for himself, his daughters, and the family they'd built from the wreckage. They hadn't just survived, they'd flourished. And in that moment, Flynn realized that this was the greatest triumph of all. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.